Before The Secret, before the New Age, before the beatniks and the human potential movement and everything that came after, there was Neville Goddard. And about 150 years before Neville stood in his first lecture hall in New York, there was a man in London named William Blake who had already mapped the entire territory Neville would spend his life teaching. Blake never used the phrase law of assumption. He never wrote about the wish fulfilled. He died in 1827, long before anything we now call manifestation existed as a concept. But he saw exactly what Neville would later see, and he wrote it down in poems, in pamphlets, in paintings, with a precision that, once you understand it, changes how you read everything Neville ever taught. This is a video about that connection. Not the biography of Blake, not a literature class, the specific places where Blake's thinking is the foundation underneath Neville's practice. The philosophical bedrock that, once you can see it, makes the practice itself feel grounded in a way it didn't before. 3 ideas. Each one Blake wrote about. Each one shows up later in Neville's work, sometimes named directly, more often quietly assumed. And each one, when you actually understand it, makes the difference between a practice that feels like wishful thinking and one that feels like working with the actual structure of how reality operates. Let's start. 1. Perception itself is creative. Here is the line of Blake's that most people have heard, even if they don't know it's his. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. Yes, that is where Jim Morrison got the band name. He picked it up from Aldous Huxley, whose 1954 book, The Doors of Perception, used Blake's line as its title. The chain of borrowing is real, but the line itself is not a slogan. It's not about peak experiences or psychedelics or any kind of altered state. It's a philosophical claim about how perception actually works. Here is what Blake was saying. Most of us assume that perception is one way. The world is out there. We are in here, behind our eyes, behind our skull. The senses are like little windows. Light comes in, sound comes in, we process it, we make a picture of the world inside our head. That picture inside our head is what we call experience. This is the model almost every contemporary neuroscientist will still describe to you. And it has a specific historical origin. It comes from a philosopher named John Locke, who was writing in the late 1600s, which means, importantly, that it has only been the dominant model for about 350 years. Before Locke, almost nobody thought about perception this way. Blake hated this model, not because he was anti-science, because he could see it was inaccurate. Here is what he said instead. The senses are not windows. They are inlets, not little holes that let limited data in, openings through which the world's actual reality enters and meets you. And what you do with what comes through, how you interpret it, what you assume about it, what you treat as real, is itself a creative act. You are not passively receiving the world. You are participating in its formation every moment, whether you know it or not. This is what he meant by cleansing the doors of perception, not unlocking a hidden superpower, realizing that perception was never the closed-off, one-way process you were told it was. The doors were never really doors. They were always thresholds. And what comes through them is shaped by what you bring to meet it. Now stay with this, because here is where it connects to Neville. When Neville says consciousness is the only reality, that is the Blake position restated. When he says the outer world is the projection of the inner state, same idea. When he insists that the imaginal act is not pretending but actually causal, he is operating from Blake's understanding of perception, not from Locke's. If perception is one way, the law of assumption sounds ridiculous. The outer world is independent. Your assumptions can't possibly change it. Of course they can't. They're locked inside your head. But if perception is participatory, if your inner state is part of how the world takes shape every single moment, then the law of assumption is not magical at all. It's the most obvious thing in the world. You have been doing it your entire life. You just didn't know that's what it was. Blake gave Neville, and gave you, if you let it land, the philosophical ground that makes the practice make sense. Imagination is not a faculty that decorates reality. It is part of how reality is formed. 2. Concentration through limitation. Here is something Blake said that on first hearing sounds like an artist's technical advice about drawing. He said the most important line in any work of art is the bounding line. Bounding, the line that bounds, that encloses, that gives the figure its edge. He chose that word deliberately, and English speakers will catch the double meaning immediately. Bounding can mean two opposite things at the same time. To bound something is to limit it, to put a fence around it, to define its edge. But to be bounding, full of bounds, is to be leaping with energy, bursting forward, unrestrained. Blake was telling you both at once. Here is what he meant. The energy of a work of art is not generated by spreading it out. It is generated by concentrating it. The line that contains the figure is what gives the figure its power. Without the line, without the edge, the figure dissipates into the page. With the line, the figure pulses with life. He used this principle in everything he made. His most famous poem opens, "Tiger, tiger, burning bright," short, rhyming, tight. The poem is about a tiger being forged in a furnace, and the form of the poem itself is a furnace. The tight meter, the rhyming couplets, those are the walls that hold the fire in. If Blake had written Tiger as free verse, long sprawling lines, lots of adjectives, the tiger described from every angle, the energy would leak out. The tiger would become an idea. With the bounding line, the tiger is alive. Now, what does this have to do with Neville's practice? Everything. Neville insisted on specific scenes. He didn't tell people to assume general wealth. He told them to imagine a specific moment that could only happen after the wealth was already real. Someone congratulating you, a handshake, a particular phrase spoken by someone who knows. He told a story about a man who wanted to recover from a fatal illness. Neville didn't say, assume health. He told him to imagine the doctor's face, the specific astonishment when the x-rays come back clean, that scene, that moment, not a general feeling of being well. Most practitioners think the specific scene is just a technique, a trick to make the imagination feel real, helpful, but maybe optional. It is not optional. It is the bounding line. The specific scene works because it has edges, because it is bounded. That boundedness is what concentrates the imaginal energy into something real enough for the subconscious to receive. A vague intention, I want to be wealthy, has no edge. The energy dissipates. There is nothing for consciousness to inhabit. A specific scene, your closest friend reaching out a hand, looking at you with a particular expression that says, I knew it would happen for you, and now it has edges in every direction. The hand, the expression, the exact phrase, the moment, the room. That scene is impossible unless the thing is already true. And that impossibility, that bounded, specific, edge-defined impossibility is what makes the imaginal act actually work. You can see why this matters now, why specificity is not a stylistic preference. This is also why the so-called naturalness trend you've seen circulating online, just assume it and then forget about it. Live your day, don't think about it, gets the practice exactly wrong. There is no bounding line in just live normally. There is no edge. There is no concentration. The whole approach mistakes the absence of striving for the absence of specificity. Blake would have recognized that mistake instantly. He spent his life making the same correction to the art world of his time, which kept trying to be impressive by being expansive when it should have been trying to be powerful by being precise. The bounding line is the law. Specificity is not a technique. It is the structure of how imagination concentrates into reality. 3. Memory closes, inspiration opens. Blake had a particular obsession with the difference between two ways the mind can work. He called one of them memory. The other he called inspiration. These words don't mean exactly what we mean by them today. Let me give you what Blake actually meant. Memory, for Blake, is the mind running on what it already has. The repetition of stored patterns, going over the same ground, pulling up the same files, the mind closing in on itself, working with what it already contains. Inspiration is the mind open to something coming in, the mind as porous, receiving, genuinely encountering rather than rehearsing. Now, Blake was not against memory. We need memory. The point is that memory has a direction of travel. It turns inward. It contracts. It cycles. Inspiration has the opposite direction. It opens outward. It expands. It receives. And here is the part that matters for Neville's practice. A formal session, sitting down, closing your eyes, returning to the same scene night after night, can be either of these things. Same external action, two completely different inner movements. If you are running the scene mechanically, replaying it the way you'd replay a memory, going through the steps, ticking the boxes. I imagined the friend. I imagined the handshake. I imagined the words, done. You are operating in memory mode. The session is closed. Nothing new is coming in. The scene is being rehearsed, not inhabited. If you are entering the scene as inhabitation, genuinely being inside it, allowing the feeling to arrive, letting the texture of it be present rather than performed, you are operating in inspiration mode. The session is open. Something is actually happening. The external behavior looks identical. The internal direction is opposite. This is the diagnosis for why some imaginal sessions feel alive and others feel stale. It's not about effort. It's about which direction the mind is moving. And this, too, is the case against the robotic affirmation approach that has flooded social media. You have seen it. Someone repeats the same phrase 100 times. I am wealthy. I am wealthy. I am wealthy. As though sheer repetition is the mechanism. As though the subconscious is a database that responds to data being entered. Blake would have called this pure memory mode, pure contraction, the mind closing in on itself, repeating, and producing exactly the opposite of what it intends. Because repetition without inhabitation is not the practice. It is the failure of the practice. The subconscious does not receive instructions through volume. It receives through occupation, through the genuine inner posture of someone for whom the thing is already real. That posture cannot be repeated mechanically into existence. It has to be genuinely entered. One time, with inspiration, beats 100 times in memory. This is what Neville meant when he said the feeling is the secret, not the words, not the visualization, the felt, occupied, inhabited posture of having. That is the inspiration side of Blake's distinction. The robotic affirmation is the memory side. Same vocabulary, opposite directions. One last thing. You'll notice these three ideas connect. Perception is participatory, meaning your inner state is part of how reality takes shape. That is the philosophical ground. Imagination concentrates through limitation, meaning the specific bounded scene is the structural law, not a stylistic preference. That is how the participation works mechanically. And the difference between memory and inspiration, meaning the session has to be genuinely entered rather than mechanically repeated. That is the diagnostic for whether the practice is actually operating or just performing itself. Three ideas, one foundation. Blake wrote them down before there was a new age, before there was a self-help industry, before there was a single Neville Goddard lecture or a single page of Florence Scovel Shinn, or a single sentence in Think and Grow Rich. He saw the structure. He named it carefully. And he died in 1827 in a small set of rooms in London, mostly unknown, mostly poor, mostly dismissed as eccentric by people who thought they were more practical than he was. 100 years later, a young man from Barbados named Neville Goddard would find his way to a black Ethiopian Jewish mystic named Abdullah, who would teach him how to read Scripture as the description of inner states. Neville never met Blake. He couldn't have. But Blake had already laid the philosophical ground that Abdullah's teaching would land on. And what Neville built, the lectures, the books, the technique, sits on top of that ground whether or not Neville named it. You are practicing on that ground too, whether you knew it or not, whether anyone ever told you or not. Now you know. The practice works because the structure is real. And the structure is older and deeper and more verified across centuries of careful thinkers than anyone in the contemporary manifestation world will usually tell you. Use it. It has been waiting for you for 200 years.